Franco wrote a good book that people wanted to read. For the folks who are writing these books for Fernwood Publishing, just write better books, right? Like this isn't rocket science. If you want to be an author, step one, write books that people want to read. Don't ask for handouts because no one wants to read your drivel, right? Like this is so basic, folks. It's so basic. Gentlemen, you've uncovered some outrageous waste going on from the federal government. Your tax dollars, if you live anywhere in Canada, are going towards some radical political propaganda. Devin, Gage, gentlemen, walk us through this. What's going on with these publishers?
This is another example, Carson, of taxpayer money being wasted on things that have nothing to do with the public interest. If people want to buy a book, taxpayers shouldn't be forced to pay for them. Let's talk about what we've uncovered here. We have Fernwood Publishing. You probably haven't heard of this publishing company. I certainly hadn't until a supporter of ours in Edmonton actually reached out and sent it along. This is a publishing company based in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, and as well has an office in Winnipeg. So both where the region I represent and the region Gage represents. This radical publishing house received nearly $500,000 in taxpayer funding in recent years. So you break down the numbers, they have over 300,000 from the federal government between 2020 to 2024. You have $135,000 from Nova Scotian taxpayers in 2024, and about $86,000 in taxpayer funding from Manitoba since 2020. So what's wrong with this? I mean, we fund book publishers all the time, taxpayers are on the hook for book publishers all the time. But we actually have to look at what Fernwood Publishing is doing. And maybe, Gage, that's where you can come in here and kind of talk about this.
Well,
Yeah, Gage,
frankly,
can you just say, Gage, this funding that taxpayers have provided to this publisher, Fernwood, is it attached to specific books or is it going towards all of their collection? And can you talk a little bit about the books that our tax dollars are publishing for Fernwood?
yeah, so a lot of this funding actually is just going straight to the publisher for them to use to kind of whatever they want, right? They're just getting a bunch of money from the federal government. In Manitoba specifically, it's supposed to be to help them market whatever books they're
Okay.
selling, which we'll get into, isn't going very well. So, as Devin off the hop, Fernwood Publishing is kind of the focus of this waste story. Because, if I went and I started a publishing company, my end goal with that publishing company is to make money, right?
Right.
I want to make money by selling books. But Fernwood bills themselves as politically driven, not profit driven. So what that means, folks, is that they're taking taxpayer dollars to essentially do whatever they want without concern about making money off the books they're selling, which is ridiculous. And then we got a couple examples of those books that aren't doing so hot, right? So the big one that Devin pointed out to me when he first went into this story was called Red Flags, A Reckoning with Communism for the Future of the Left. And that book describes itself as uneasy truths the left needs to confront if it is to build a genuinely liberatory alternative to capitalism. I mean, they're already kind of doing that with all the taxpayer money they're taking, but that's a separate point, I guess.
So these are books that if they were being sold by any like normal publisher, wouldn't sell, right? I don't think
Well,
Canadians are lining up around the block to buy, what is it? Red Flags, the story of communism or whatever? Gage?
a reckoning with communism for the future of the left. But Carson, we've got that
Oh,
information
oh,
on
so
whether
you've
it's
you've
doing
done
well.
this homework.
So
You've
we,
dug up how many people are actually buying these books?
as much as we can, anyways. So we went to Amazon when we saw this book. We're like, hey, well, maybe though they just struck gold on something that I'm not interested in, right? Maybe it was like it's like a book on golf. I'm never going to buy a book on golf, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We went to Amazon. The book currently has 0 reviews as of recording on Amazon. It's ranked 472nd, not in books about communist and socialist ideologies, and ranked 82nd in books about Marxism philosophy. I mean, again, not my cup of tea, either of those scenarios. But I'm assuming they're not big sellers in general. So to be the almost 500th popular in the communist section shows that it's not doing too well, but they're still getting thousands of taxpayer dollars to market this book.
Yeah, and just scrolling through their website, it doesn't sound like this communist reckoning is a one-off with the types of books they publish. I'm just on their new releases section on their website. You know, you've got The Genocide Continues, Becoming an Ally, fourth edition. You've got Divided Power, Policing Black Lives. So it does seem like the vast majority of the books that this publishing house takes taxpayer money to publish are sort of niche social justice, very, very politically motivated. Do you think this, Devin, why don't you jump in here? Do you think this is a good use of federal and Nova Scotia taxpayer dollars?
Certainly not, Carson. This is a massive waste of money from three different governments. And I mean, these aren't bestsellers.
Yeah.
They're taxpayer funded vanity projects pushing fringe politics. It is not, this isn't, this isn't, someone writing a book about, a mainstream political issue. You have these tax dollars going towards pushing the most fringe identity politics that no one cares about, as Gage referenced some of the sales numbers. And look at some of the other books. I made note of one. We have I'll Get Right on It, poems about working life in the climate crises. So we have poetry books about climate change being funded by three levels of government. At the same time, people are lining up at food banks and being unable to afford their mortgage. So it's completely a waste of money. And, it's not just this one company. We'll point out this one company in particular that seems to be kind of the most radical example of this. But governments have built whole funding programs, the federal level at provincial levels, that hand out millions every year to publishers, just like this. This is money that could go to tax relief. It could go to real priorities for governments like healthcare or infrastructure. Or, if you look at the recent debt numbers in Nova Scotia, you look at the debt in Manitoba, you look at the debt federally, it could go towards actually stopping government from borrowing billions every year. So there's a lot better ways this money could be used than funding publishers who aren't even, by their own admissions like this one, not even trying to make profit. They don't even care. They're probably just handing these books out to their colleagues and friends. There's no it's mind-boggling, Carson.
Well, and Devin, I think you actually hit on something really, really, really important for our viewers and listeners to keep in mind here, right? Every single dollar that goes to this new communist manifesto or these poetry compilations about climate change, right? That's money that's not going towards supporting Canadians. I took a hike through Stanley Park here in Vancouver over the weekend, and I saw folks pitching tents to spend the night in the park because they can't afford to keep a roof over their head. Every dollar that goes towards this climate change poetry or these other kind of radical identity politics books is money that's not going towards supporting those folks. It's money that's not making everyone's life easier by cutting taxes and leaving more money in our pockets to begin with. Gage, I want to throw to you for a second. What do you think this says about the culture of waste overall in our government that this is where they're prioritizing spending?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there that are pretty important. I think the first one, just to kind of highlight, is that it's important to talk about the radical stuff that the government is funding here. But if some radical publishing house wants to start on its own and publish whatever books it wants, it's free to do so, right? Everybody here, I think, believes in free speech. It's a thing that's we wouldn't be able to do our jobs without that kind of stuff. But it's completely different from being allowed to publish your own book on communism and getting taxpayer money to do it without trying to make a profit on that, which I mean is kind of ironic on a book with communism. But to get to your main point, it shows that there's a huge problem in all of these three governments when it comes to waste, right? The government, when people look at the government, they expect that they should, build roads, they should build hospitals, have some funding for some police officers in there, some paramedics, all that kind of stuff. Those are the things that people think of as government. People don't think of government as, I think we should be funding radical publishing houses, right? So it speaks to the whole culture because there's a myriad of programs for every government at all levels that's just handing out money to these companies that aren't making money and they're making books that no one reads. And you can kind of say that no one reads them even without having the fine details of the sales numbers because or else why would they need a bunch of money from the government if they were wildly successful? So it's
Yeah.
ridiculous to waste all of the money on this stuff when Devin rightly pointed out that all of these governments are deep in debt, borrowing more every year. The finance ministers of all these places will always stand up and say something along the lines of, we really tried hard this year to make sure we're spending on priorities. And apparently in Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and the federal government, that means funding publishers that don't care at all about making a profit, but publishing books that no one will read.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Gage. Like in politics and economics, you talk about this marketplace of ideas, right? Like there should be the free exchange of knowledge, of information, but it shouldn't be taxpayer subsidized, right? Like if you believe that communism is the best way forward and everyone's going to get a million free unicorns, like great, believe that. Convince us, like sell us on those ideas, fundraise to get your book published, sell it to make sure you can write more. But don't come knocking at the taxpayer's door asking for handouts when we can't afford it to pay for your political propaganda and your vanity projects. Look, our colleague, our good friend Franco Terrazzano, just wrote and published a book. I hear he had some help with chapters 4 through 6. Hey, Gage?
Yeah, I mean, I did my best to make Franco look good. Sometimes he has trouble with that, but we teamed up. And the great thing about the book that Franco wrote is absolutely $0 came from the government when we wrote that thing, right?
Yeah,
So it's
it's right here. And folks bought it, right? Franco wrote a book. Franco wrote a good book that people wanted to read. For the folks who are writing these books for Fernwood Publishing, just write better books, right? Like this isn't rocket science. If you want to be an author, step one, write books that people want to read. Don't ask for handouts because no one wants to read your drivel, right? Like this is so basic, folks. It's so basic. Devin, Gage, any last thoughts to close us off here?
Yeah, I just want to say it's so important. You hit an important point there, Carson. This isn't about ideology. This
No.
is about fairness. No political group, they want to call themselves a publishing house. They're essentially a political organization, should be getting taxpayer subsidies to get their message out. Here at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we take $0 from governments of any shape or size, and we're proud to do so. We get our message out through the channels, through the people watching us here right now. And when you have these handouts, it actually distorts the market. So if you're a publishing company that actually, is willing to stand on its own feet and sell and write good books that sell, and you choose not to take these subsidies, it means the government's actually hurting your business by sponsoring your competition. It is outrageous. It is, we essentially the solution is simple, folks. We need to end these handouts. And I wrote down one thing when we were talking about debt, and that was $1.2 billion. That's how much the Nova Scotia government budget deficit was this year. It's the greatest in the province's history. If they ended these handouts, they would save some money that can go towards getting that debt under control. So, if a book has value, people will buy it. If it doesn't, taxpayers shouldn't be forced to make up the difference. We need to end these handouts immediately in Nova Scotia, in Gage's side of the country, in Manitoba, and as well in Ottawa.
Yeah, and Gage, before I throw to you for last thoughts, like let's just read the blurbs of one of these books. This is the Becoming an Ally, fourth edition. An accessible guide on what structural oppression is and how people can work together towards equity. Bishop explores oppression's impact on individuals, organizations, and cultures within that larger framework. Like, come on, right? But I fell asleep reading that. Write books people want to read. Gage, any last thoughts?
I think Devin summed it up greatly there, and it's the same thing that's going on in Manitoba. The government's borrowing billions of dollars every year, adding to the debt, saying there's no room to cut waste. This is a clear example where the government can cut waste, find some savings for taxpayers, and it's an easy place to start, and they should do it.
Folks, you've been watching Waste Watch, a weekly show from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My name's Carson Binda, and I'm BC Director for the CTF, and today I was joined by Gage Haubrich and Devin Drover. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And let us know what you think down below. Should taxpayer dollars be paying for this kind of radical political propaganda? Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.